Let's continue our journey of why we eat by talking about different kinds of eating styles. So in the last video, we talked about foodways, all of the different cultural, religious, personal, learned habits that we might have as a result of just growing up in our society that we live in. And we talked about how those cognitive beliefs can dictate what we eat, how we eat, when we eat, why we eat, who we eat with, and all of the different components that might be involved in making food decisions. So I want to backtrack just a moment. And we briefly talked about this last time, but I really want to touch on this idea of our natural style of eating. So what most registered dietitians, nutritionists, food researchers have figured out is that when we are little, aside from the neophobia that we're born with, if you give kids a variety of healthy food options, they will get their caloric needs met, they'll get their macro and micronutrient needs met if we just leave them well enough alone. Because we are born as intuitive eaters. We know when we're hungry, and we eat when we're hungry, and we stop when we're full. We don't feel guilty about it. We don't have any rules about it. We just eat because we want to, right? Healthy options that are given to us. But as we talked about last time, as we grow up, we begin to learn different food ways and food rules that mom, dad, media, culture, religion, school, all of these different kinds of people we're exposed to and environments we're exposed to may teach us about what we should and should not be eating, how, who, why, all of that. So most of us in early childhood begin to get away from intuitive eating because we've had these food ways and rules enforced upon us, and we no longer even sometimes know when we're hungry and when we're full. So as adults, we still sometimes have people who are intuitive eaters. Yay if you're one of them. Keep doing what you're doing. But more often than not, we end up in one of three categories. We have the careful eaters. So these are individuals that are very aware of what they're eating, when they're eating, how they're eating, why they're eating. There are a lot of food rules around this that seem to be centered on health and nutrition. And there's nothing inherently wrong with being a careful eater, as long as you're truly doing it because you want to be healthy and not because you're trying to purposefully restrict. So the careful eater, we worry sometimes that they're too careful, and that can lead to disordered eating habits in some individuals. So they seem from the outside to be perfect eaters. They have all of these food rules that they have in place. They may be dietary based of things that they do and don't eat. They may be time based. You don't eat after 6 p.m. You don't eat before 8 a.m. They may be all kinds of reasons, right, that they've learned throughout their lives. And so the problem and why we worry with the careful eaters is it's not just about health often. Often it's this paired with anxiety. And when we're pairing anxiety around food, we worry. So their eating style often is to display agony, really. It's a very anxiety driven of everything that they are allowing themselves to eat. There are so many rules and they're so worried about breaking them. But they spend often more time analyzing food labels and calories and apps and dietary rules and regulations and whatever that they don't even eat, right? They're just so busy about what they're eating that they really aren't listening to their bodies. They're not intuitive eaters. They're not tuning into what their body actually needs. So they may ask a lot of questions about food content and preparation. Some of this may be allergy driven, and if that's you, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. If you have a food allergy or intolerance, please don't eat the food. We don't want to make you sick. But these are often individuals that, if you ever saw Portlandia, there's an episode that really, really describes careful eaters to a T. If I think about it, I'll stick it in the module folder for the week. And they end up going to the farm where the chicken was produced because they're so worried about the chicken being healthy. All right, so that's kind of the epitome of a careful eater. So it's really anxiety driven and less about health. So they appear healthy, and they are, but psychologically, we may worry about them. They tend to undereat, they over-monitor, they spend most of their time actually thinking about food, planning their next meal or snack. There's so much anxiety around this. So they feel very guilty when they eat foods that they have deemed as unhealthy. And it's not necessarily that the food is unhealthy, so much so that in their rules, it's been categorized as unhealthy. So maybe they decided that bananas are not healthy. Dietitians will tell you bananas are very healthy. They have a lot of potassium. But if you've decided that for whatever reason bananas are not healthy and you avoid bananas, then that kind of would be part of that, and you're not allergic to them, that would be part of that careful eater that we might worry about leading to disordered eating habits. Sometimes they do allow a splurge. It could be on a weekend or a social gathering, and then they'll immediately go back to their rules and feel really guilty about having splurged. Professional dieter. Oh, this was my mother. It still is my mother, truth be told. Constantly dieting. They're trying every diet under the sun. And we'll talk more about dieting and metabolism. We'll have a whole section on dieting. But as an eating style, these individuals are always on a diet. They can quote Jenny Craig's motto, Weight Watchers, South Beach, Atkins. I mean, they've tried everything. They're always on the lookout for the next best diet, because dieting has never actually worked for them. So they make choices. Again, there's a lot of anxiety about it. It's not about health. It's about losing weight. It's about budging the scale. If they're not currently on a diet, they're planning their next diet. So we'll talk about this more when we get to the dieting section, but a lot of times there's the yo-yo dieting phenomenon where they diet, they give up, get frustrated, and then they go off their diet. They may binge eat or partake in what's called the Last Supper phenomenon, which is you start eating everything you didn't allow yourself to eat on the diet because you know that tomorrow you're going to go back on the diet. So these are the professional dieters. And it's very much the yo-yo dieting phenomenon. They're always looking for the next diet. And they're stuck and they're lost and they're frustrated and they're anxious. And it's disheartening because they feel like no matter what they do, they can't do, quote unquote, the right thing. And so oftentimes we do see these individuals headed down the road of disordered eating and or disordered exercise patterns, or using extreme weight loss tactics, excessive laxative use, diet pills, etc., always looking for a way to lose the weight, but not in a healthy fashion. We'll talk more about dieting and healthy ways to lose weight as we progress with the course. Last but not least, we have the unconscious eater, also known as the mindless eater. So we talked a little bit last time about mindful eating. So the unconscious eater tend to eat while they're doing another activity, driving, watching TV, talking on the phone. Sometimes they're really not even aware of the fact that they're doing it. So when we talk about the unconscious eater, we break this down into 4 different categories. So the chaotic unconscious eater actually just often describes a lot of college students because you're overbooked, you're crazy busy, you grab a snack bar, whatever is there, when you have time in the 5 minutes you have while you're running from one class to another. You may value nutrition, you may value diet, but you just don't have time. And so it's like, okay, I just got to get through college and then I'll have time. Often goes long periods of time without eating because they're booked back to back. And this is kind of just a function of scheduling and busyness. So it's just something to be aware of if this is you, trying to think of ways that maybe you can add a little bit more real food, healthy eating, mindful eating back into your life. So the refuse not unconscious eater. So these individuals often grew up in settings where there was food scarcity. And so when they had food, they ate it because they weren't sure when the next time was going to be available to them. They're vulnerable to the presence of food. It doesn't matter whether they're hungry or not. They're going to eat. They will clean your plate. They will clean their plate. They will eat any food left lying around at meetings, office candy dishes, anything that may be available. Again, not necessarily because they're hungry, but just because they don't want that food to go to waste because they didn't have it when they were a child. So oftentimes these individuals end up struggling with their weight because even if they're full, they will continue eating. The waste not unconscious eater. may have also grown up in a food insecure household, but it was more financially motivated. And so parents may have talked a lot about, you've got to clean your plate. I paid a lot of money for that. There's a lot of knowledge around the fact that food is costly, and so you should get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. So maybe you grew up with a lot of drive-through dollar menu kind of meals because they were cheap and they were easy. And again, like the refuse not, they will clean your plate, they will clean their plate because they don't want to waste the money that they spent on the food. And again, this is often geared in a childhood where there were a lot of financial insecurity and maybe some food insecurity. The emotional unconscious eater. Food is a coping mechanism for these individuals. Interesting fact, the United States has more unconscious eaters, according to the research, than any other country in the world. We learned growing up that food is a coping mechanism. You're angry, you're stressed, you're lonely, you're bored, food will fix your problem. That's what we learn, and so that's what we do. And so we can eat a variety of different things for emotional reasons. A lot of us have different comfort foods that we have kind of go to when we've had a bad day or we're going through a lot of stress. And again, it's not about not being hungry or being hungry. It's about the food filling a need or an emotional void. Depending on how frequently you engage in unconscious eating, sometimes, again, these individuals may suffer with overweight, because they don't want to, they keep self-soothing with food, right? So keep self-soothing, tend to overeat even if they're not hungry. Not always. Some people just emotionally eat occasionally. But if it's a day-to-day food as a coping mechanism, then it may end up with some excess weight.